listening to Unfiltered with Muhammad Uncut, a podcast about personal growth and authentic leadership. If you're looking for tips on how to manage others, get ahead, and make your way up the corporate ladder, this is not the show for you. This podcast is about being of service to others, leading from the heart, and evolving into a better version of yourself. Each episode brings you motivated stories about unfiltered leadership and authentic leaders, those who involve others, use their influence to amplify diverse perspectives, and inspire teams to achieve collective results. If this sounds like you, keep listening. Welcome to the Unfiltered Podcast. Unfiltered is the podcast for leaders who involve others, use their influence to help them rise, and inspire them to become better versions of themselves. The Unfiltered Podcast showcases leaders who lead from the heart to make a positive change. And today, we have Andy Kaufman, who is the unfiltered leader. Andy brings enthusiasm and energy and humor to everything that he does. And we're going to learn about who Andy is and what helps him get out of bed in the morning, why he does what he does. So welcome to the podcast, Andy.
Oh, man, Muhammad, I've been looking forward to this. Thank you so much for the invite. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I'm going to give my listeners just a bit of background about who you are. Definitely, you inspire me. I've been watching your videos, listening to you on the various platforms where you share your message. But I think it's important just to give them a bit of background. So Andy Kaufman is a recognized expert on leadership and project management. He is the president of the Institute for Leadership Excellence and Development, which helps organizations around the world to improve their ability to lead and deliver. In addition to running the Institute, Andy works with leaders at the United Nations to help improve their ability to deliver on initiatives. He teaches MBA classes at Loyola Chicago's Quinlan School of Business and works with global clients such as Marriott International, Microsoft, United Airlines, Grainger, Takeda, Credit Suisse, AbbVie, and ExxonMobil. Before becoming an internationally sought-after speaker, Andy started as a software developer and was promoted into management for, well, all the wrong reasons. As he grew from frontline manager to senior leader, Andy developed approaches for leading and delivering that he now shares with his audiences and coaching clients around the world, and he's going to be sharing them with us here on the Unfiltered Podcast. So that formal introduction aside, in your own words, Andy, you tell us, who is Andy Kaufman?
Yeah, well, what you just said doesn't generally come up when somebody asks me that question. Usually, it's always the context of the question. But I had Nancy Duarte on the podcast years ago, and I asked her a question. I said, "So, Nancy, tell me about yourself." And she said, "Well, are you asking about who I am or what I do?" And I think that's a really interesting thing, that in an unfiltered world, we too often default to what we do, right? And then all of a sudden, our identity is all about what we do instead of who we actually are. So I have to tell you, one of the greatest privileges I have in this world is being husband to Sarah for the last 32 years and being the dad of 5 kids on purpose, and so it's like as far as who I am, that is like so much of my world and even why I do what I do. And outside of that, I speak at companies. I do a lot of coaching and leading workshops and things like that. But my passion, the core of who I am, starts with my local tribe there, right? It's like, what can I do to pour into them and help prepare them? So I live in the Chicago area. I've been central U.S. for most of my life. And so I have the privilege of working with organizations around the world. I couldn't imagine being happier in a job, Muhammad. I just couldn't even imagine that.
And it sounds like the first job that you have as a husband and father. And, this is why I love doing this podcast. You talked about being unfiltered, and it really is. People say to me, so is this about leadership? Is this about, how I can be better at work? Yeah, it can be. But if you're not an unfiltered leader, somebody who is authentic in their approach to parenting or to having a partner, being a good person in your tribe, in your home, in your community, you're not going to be that person in your workplace. Right. And, we know our job doesn't define who we are. We are not defined by what we do. We are defined by who we are and how we show up. And Tell me about it. This I think defines your definition of leadership. But what does leadership mean to you?
Well, actually, it's a really good question because, you could say in some ways that leadership is followership. So if you don't have someone following you, you're not a leader. But years ago, I came across, I don't even remember the guy's name. It was an early episode in the podcast, and it wasn't even a major point in his book, but it was a book. I think the name of the book was something Better Under Pressure. If I remember right, that was the name of the book. And he does a lot of executive coaching and things like that. But his definition really resonated with me in that his definition was maximizing potential. So what leaders do is we maximize potential. And then he said, in ourselves as well as the people around us. So I've never come across any leadership or definition of leadership that I'd say perfectly captures it all. But that's a part of it that I think is often missing. That it's not just that we take people to there, and like we've had Jim Kouzis of Kouzis and Posner and their the Leadership Challenge. We've had them on the podcast twice, and they talk about we take people from here to there. We inspire them despite the challenges, and that's good. I think those are all good. But I think there's something powerful, Mohammed, about, first of all, am I maximizing my potential? Right? Am I maximizing my potential? And that's so easy not to do. It's so easy not to do. It's so easy to get complacent. And then, am I maximizing the potential of the people around me? And that is a good reminder that we're not just trying to create mini-me's. What is Muhammad's desire and potential? What is Sue's? All these different people have different potentials. And I guess the politically correct thing to say is we all have the same potential, but the truth is some people don't want more leadership. They were happy being in this role. They're let's maximize that role for them.
Right.
But I think there's something powerful about that idea. And then just this just over the summer, so within the last couple months, I had the opportunity to interview Harvard's Frances Frye, amazing woman at Harvard, and her definition of leadership is interesting because it talks about the name of the book is Unleashed, and so that's kind of the core. We're unleashing, so that's along the lines of maximizing potential, but we're empowering people. But check this out, empowering them because of our interactions with them, and they're even empowered in our absence, which means that they're not only good while we're around, and even that we have to really think through. Is my presence actually helping or is it hurting? But in addition to the presence, our absence, which I think I would normally not think about in leadership. I think I'd normally think, when I'm involved, am I making it better? But what about when I leave? Like when we're done with this conversation, do you and I have even a greater influence over the people that listen because they were inspired to do more? They're inspired to learn more. I think I can be a better podcaster after watching you do this, and hopefully I can have some influence on you. But the point is, it's while we're together, are we making things better? And in our absence, does it continue or does it drop off like a rock? So I don't know. I think those are two interesting ways of looking at leadership that aren't maybe the standard, typical academic definitions.
And we're not looking for those yet, right?
Right.
I don't want those standard academic that have confined us to either a command and control, rank and order description that I'm here to tell you how to get things done and I'm watching you. Rather, I'm here to inspire you. I'm here to involve you, and I'm here to help, use my influence to help you get to a better place, to maximize the potential. Because the great takeaway from understanding maximizing potential is that potential doesn't have an endpoint.
Right.
It's always increasing. It's always appreciating. It's always growing. And therefore, when you focus on making it bigger, better, stronger, you're always pushing yourself. You're always growing. And then, Fry, and what she's talking about unleashing, it's that powerful being able to rip it open and unpack it and peel back the layers so that it can really come out authentically, but not remain within us. I mean, knowledge, if I tell you that I've got a diamond or a coal in here, you don't know. If this is knowledge, you have no idea what I'm holding in my hand. Right. Knowledge serves nobody until it is shared. And until I've unleashed it, I cannot help you grow, because then now it is a diamond or a coal. and you know how hard you have to work, right? So
I,
knowledge only serves us when we share it with others. That's the power of knowledge. I think that's how knowledge helps us grow.
And I love your point about the fact that sometimes people have far more potential than they realize. And so maybe you and I can both think of, and everyone listening to us can think of maybe former bosses or mentors or people who saw more in us than what we saw. And so it is not this finite, whoop, I filled up that potential. It's like, oh, wait, there's more that we can do. And so I love your point on that one, Mohammed. That's good.
Well, the universe is forever growing. It's expanding. It's spiraling. And I believe we have the universe in our heart, right? We are the universe in motion. So if we can appreciate that we are also spiraling to new levels of learning and growing and knowing and self-knowing, we can unleash that power that's within us. But a lot of us, we don't want to embrace that vulnerability. We don't want to step out of our comfort zone. We don't want to embrace fear and look it in the eye and then go to the point where we can grow. So it's just comforting to sit back and say, I'm okay. So to your point earlier, it's not about having to take you to a different level. It's about helping you move to a different level, right? And sometimes, we put on our manager or leader hat and we say, oh, you know what? You need to move into, in this organization, you need to become a leader. You need to become a supervisor. Yeah. It's changing your mindset and your heart set. Yeah. It's allowing people to shift and to grow, but it's also giving them that ability to say, you've got potential. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about it. What do you think your potential is? Here's what I see your potential is, because potential is relative, right? Right? Yeah. Like if you say to somebody, you've got potential. Right. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. I want to go back to what you said earlier about what we take away from interactions. Like sometimes I can grow from meeting somebody for 3 seconds on the bus, or on the subway, and knowing that person impacted me. They left an imprint and that experience. And so today's podcast, without a doubt, is going to leave an imprint and help me grow. And I think as leaders, if we can look at the imprint that we're leaving on people, that is how we can help them unleash their potential. It's to say, well, look, this is what you've got in you. What do you think? And help them surface that opportunity that remains latent if they don't recognize it. And I think as leaders, if we're not helping others grow by getting them to shift inward and to look and to become more self-aware, then that potential just goes dormant, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. Ed Schein, the MIT fellow who he's now in his 90s, he's like, it was like talking to Yoda, quite frankly. I mean, this guy's just like dripping with wisdom. And he says it this way, which I think is an interesting way of saying it. He goes, and his terms are somewhat academic, but I think they can be applied in an unfiltered sort of way. And that is, he goes, there's stress, there's anxiety in learning new things, of trying to stretch our potential. It's just easier not to do it. So we only will go through that when survival anxiety is greater than learning anxiety, which is kind of an interesting way of looking at it. So, post-COVID, people living through these last 5-6 months, depending on when they're listening to this, a lot of people have lost jobs. A lot of people went from feeling really good about where things are at to maybe a lot of uncertainty. So survival anxiety is high. Survival anxiety means, okay, it's going to be tough to learn this new stuff, but I've got to learn this new stuff. I got to leverage LinkedIn. I've got to update. I've got to do more networking, because survival anxiety has gotten so high. I don't know. For some reason, I found that to be a helpful model. Am I just getting complacent? Or can you and I force ourselves back to that maximizing our own potential of just say, well, wait a minute, we'll get past this. There'll be a vaccine eventually. There'll be something that we won't be talking about COVID on a daily basis, but there'll be something else in the future.
Right.
So just not getting complacent,
Building resilience. when I think about survival anxiety, it's because, is there a saber-toothed tiger behind me? Right. Right. Am I going to have dinner or be dinner? Right. And so I think during COVID and during the pandemic, we really saw how truly vulnerable we are as a global community, and how easy it is for us to be hurt. Right. And we were all in this together, and we recognized that was it a weakness or was it a strength, right? And I think, to your point, if I accepted it and it became a new normal for me, that I hate that word because new normal means we're going to build on the old normal, and the old normal was horrible. That's why we were here. That's how we got here. Is we weren't strong enough and resilient enough to continuously push forward because we did get complacent. We got complacent in how we work with each other. We took each other for granted. We took nature for granted. You know, the hole in the ozone layer, you know, repaired itself because we gave the earth opportunity to heal. And I think, you know, this pandemic is allowing us to heal. Yes, people have lost their jobs and unfortunate people have died. But for those of us that can continue to move forward and look behind us, I think we need to build on our abilities to unleash our potential because there's still a lot there, right? But something you say that I think is incredible, I want to go back to it, about what we do when we're in the presence of someone or in the absence. You know, great leadership. Is it when you're there because somebody's watching you and measuring you and giving you feedback you're doing good, recognizing you? Or will you be involved enough and inspired by that person when they turn away, you continue to role model what you've learned from them? So can you tell me a bit more, unpack it for me? What is this whole thing about?
Yeah. So if someone's a parent, they can relate to this, but we can find other ones as well. But if my kids are only behaving because I'm there, and as soon as dad is gone, they're like, woohoo, the old man's gone. Yeah.
The cat's out, the mice will play.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think that's a practical non-work example that, who are we when we're not being watched, right? So that's kind of a character thing. And so here's I think a practical way of looking at it from a work perspective is, you and I've had the privilege of leading groups of people before, and teams disband. People leave companies. And so one of the amazing joys of getting older is looking back at people that I had the opportunity to be the manager over, or director or vice president, whatever, and now seeing how they're leading. Now, I'm not saying it's because of me, but hopefully it's not in spite of me, right? Hopefully there was some benefit that they got under that time. And by the way, I got a lot of benefit from them too. I'm thinking of some specific people that I feel like they taught me as much about leadership as I taught them. But there's this thing about what does our wake look like? You know, like who's in our wake, and is it bodies, you know, or is it other leaders who are just, you look around, they're like, man, look at what they're doing over there, and that to me is just downright inspiring. When you can look at people, it's not because of my influence now. Hopefully, the influence, like Bob Sutton, the Stanford professor, his book Good Boss, Bad Boss, he says this: one sign of a good boss is that when you spend time with them, they energize you. A bad boss is they suck the life out of you. Okay? So that's kind of the present side of it, of like, oh my goodness, I got to be with Andy again. Like, I mean, if people walk away like they have to tolerate us, clearly it's not effective leadership. Who cares what the title is, right? But if we energize them, that and not just caffeine and sugar sort of energize them, but that like, man, I see what Muhammad does with this podcast. Maybe I could do a podcast someday, you know? Or I saw the way he handled that conflict. You know, you can actually have respectful differences about policy or social causes and not get into a fight. Those are the things that can inspire people beyond just that interaction to maybe weeks or months or years later, they're still calling back to that.
Right. It's not the destructive conflict that arises from having differences. It's recognizing that through our differences, we can find what makes us stronger, and we can create creative innovation, and we can actually grow and have productive conflict and diversity, right? You know, we're not going to be the same, but, you know, we can treat each other equitably and equally, but we don't have to be the same. And you know, it's a matter of recognizing we're okay to be different, but let's find a common ground and build on that, because no foundation can be built if you don't have common ground, where otherwise, you know, at the slightest shaking of the earth beneath you, the entire house comes falling down, right? But I love what you say. Most of us think about, I want to leave a legacy of, and you don't call it a legacy, you call it a wake. You call it like, I can just look behind me. I saw you do that. I saw you just look behind you. And am I leaving bodies in my wake? Or am I leaving people who are inspired by me role modeling certain behavior as opposed to role playing, right? So many leaders, so many people in positions of influence. Maybe that's another way to look at leadership. You're in a position where people will look to you to say, how will she behave? How will he behave so that I can behave accordingly, right? And to your point, if people can't tolerate us and they look to us and they behave like us out of fear, or they hate how we behave and do the exact opposite, we ain't good at what we do, right? So, but when you talk about that wake, I don't have to wait till I'm gone to see how people will behave. And so, you know, that absence that you talked about, it could be a very immediate absence. It could even be when, you know, as you build that trust, so that when you've enabled people to behave in a certain way and you just walk away out of the room or out of the office or out of their life, you've left them with the skill set and the inspiration that they can carry through. And I want to call it a legacy, but kind of carry through with your vision.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and maybe to the point where they feel like it's not even our vision, it's their vision, right? So you know, in that regard, it would be good to not be remembered. You know, like truly, if one of my sons, if he spends the rest of his life saying, "Well, what would Dad do here?" I don't want him necessarily to do it. I want it to be so core into him that he can make this, and it feels like his. So he's not living in a shadow. And I think from a leadership perspective too, is once again, we're not trying to create mini-me's, right? We're trying to, you know, who are they and how can we unleash that? And so they're not just doing exactly what they see in the front. No, and so
we're not going to grow, right? We're not going to unleash that potential if we're always saying, what would Dad do? What would my boss do? Right? But if you give them the options and the skill sets and the room to grow, then you know what? They'll say, what can I do? Right? You know, Andy, no doubt, because I've watched you speak, and, you know, at least virtually, and you bring a certain level of humor to the way you present yourself and the way you show up. And I know you're a very serious and very intelligent person, but why is humor so important?
You know, it's interesting because I agree with you that it is, but let me take the flip side of it for a second, is that if I try to be funny, I'm actually not very funny. So if I try to use some sort of like canned joke, or
you were just funny though.
But
you were just funny.
but some people are like that. So often when I think I grew up, and, you know, keeping it unfiltered here is like a little child. I think I was probably like, how can I keep peace? And so humor can be a way to like, kind of like, just, you know, ease over, you know, smooth over some things. And so it probably developed that way. But as a first-time manager, like you read the part about me getting promoted for all the wrong reasons. I was a software developer. We had a small company, bought out by another company, bought out by another company. When they bought out that company, they fired a bunch of people. And so they're like, all right, so who should we promote here to be the new manager? It's like, well, I was a reasonably good software developer, so they made the terrible assumption I'd be a reasonably good manager. And I made all kinds of mistakes, like trying to be buddy with everybody, trying to do all the work myself, not delegating. So there's all kinds of mistakes I made. But over time, learned how to enjoy that, became a director, became a vice president. But when I became a vice president, my boss was a very serious person and didn't look at humor the same way. So we'll talk about how humor can be good, but I want to share this other side of it too, because I think this is less obvious, that I got to a point at times where I'd be in a meeting as a VP and this boss is like a senior VP and I'm cracking jokes, I think in part to ease my anxiety of having a really tough boss. But I think that tough boss looked at it as like, I don't know if Andy understands the sense of urgency here, you know? So I think it's obvious to us all, but a good reminder that there's a time and place for everything. And there are times where this is not the time to crack a joke. All that said, it is amazing how there seems to be just something within us that humor just kind of breaks down walls, especially if I find it's self-deprecating. Because I actually had some guys in the podcast, they wrote a book called The Humor Code, and they decomposed humor. Like, what is it that makes things funny? And it actually takes some of the fun out of it, quite frankly, that they did. But one of the things that they talk about is
Software
that,
developers.
all right, yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure there's all kinds of jokes there. But one of the things they said is almost every joke has a winner and a loser. So you and I could say something that you and I both laugh at, but maybe even the other person smiles, but not with their eyes, so to speak. And this is one of those things where I'm constantly thinking about it would be an exaggeration, but when I'm speaking, I can say something trying to use the humor because it helps us be more relatable. It drops walls, but it could be easily insulting the other person, whether it was intended or not. And there's some interesting neuroscience that suggests that social pain lights up the same parts of the brain as physical pain. And so I think we'd all agree that slapping somebody's worse, but by dissing somebody, even if it was unintentional. So it's this fine line between, man, we're all so easily offended these days, relax. Okay, and there's some truth to that, but there's also this, be wise in how we use it. And so often what I'll try to do, and I actually try very intentionally about this, that the humor is not about something that the person said or about some attribute of them, whether it's physical or because of my work with the UN. I just got finished a program with some people in West Africa. So my French ends with, like, growing up, or a Canadian, you know far more French than I do. All right. So my between oui and au revoir.
That's good. You're hired.
Yeah. So there's a lot of interesting challenges there. But in my discomfort, I could easily say things that could be insulting or whatever, because what's funny to me, so maybe this is the big lesson, what's funny to us is not always funny to other people. It can be taken the other way. So with care and with intentionality that it is not personal about someone, which is really easy to do, so easy to do, and it can hurt. It just drops walls. It just makes us more relatable. We're not taking everything so seriously. And there's I would say the majority of the time in business that the humor will work. It's just being aware of I guess if I allow myself, I can get very sarcastic. I have to be really careful with that one, Mohammed. I have to be really careful because
I sense the same thing with myself. Yep, I know that.
Yeah.
So, and I was on a road trip with my daughter and her girlfriends a few days ago, and I wanted to belong. I wanted to feel youthful with them, and it was easier to do that by cracking these jokes or making comments, right? And I caught myself. So wait a minute, I'm not in high school. I'm not in university, and I have to be careful because from a position of power, it could be misconstrued that I'm insulting them. I'm right. But if I can turn that humor back on myself, if it's self-deprecating, and I can say, look, I did this, right? Or gee, I'm right. It shows that we're in this together, and it makes it easier for people. And I think, when it comes to even giving feedback is if we can say, look, I'm not that good at this, and look how I did this, and show that humility, right? Humility helps us to build a bridge towards a greater humanity. And when we're giving feedback, if we have to give difficult feedback, constructive feedback, if we can show, hey, when I was learning this is something that I struggled with, and just show that humility, that person is now going to say, oh, you had a hard time with this? No way, but look, you're so good at it now. And it's to show that, well, this is what I did. What do you think you can do to overcome, right? Or to grow or to unleash your potential, right? And our language, our body language, our the words that we use, they can either knock people down or build them up, right? And, we talked about being unfiltered. Unfiltered is about helping people rise. It's about not knocking them down, whether you're doing that through your intention or not. It's helping people just become more aware, more confident, more loving, more embracing of who they are, right? So many of us walk around with the shadows of who we want to be. And, I don't know if you said this at the beginning of the session, but regret is knowing that you didn't fully live in that moment. And then isn't life a sequence of those sort of regrets? I'm waiting for tomorrow because tomorrow somebody's going to deliver something for me. Or I'm waiting, for example, we're doing construction in my home. Oh, when the office is done, I'm going to be so excited. The office is done, I move in, it's history.
Yeah.
Well, I could have enjoyed today being here, present
Yeah.
in my environment. I don't have to wait for a better situation or a relatively better situation or a situation that I think could be better. What can I do from this situation to make it better, right? And I think sometimes when we stop looking at the gift that we have within our hand right now, and that's something I think humor helps us do, right? So I think when you and I are somewhat not joking, but we're shooting the breeze, or we're just being human with each other.
Right.
We're breaking down those walls, right?
Right. Yeah, that's true. You know, I was talking to somebody I know really well, and he said one of the reasons I listen to podcasts at night when I'm trying to fall asleep is it allows me to not think about all the mistakes I made during that day. Now, I think that's really sad. I really think that's really sad because, well, first of all, I hope it's not your podcast or my podcast.
I know I was going to say they're falling asleep on my podcast. That tells you something.
Because I fall asleep right away. But you know, we live in an age where there's so much distraction that it can keep us from really kind of thinking about these things. And with the regrets, we can sit there and ruminate and use those regrets to tear us down, to tear ourselves down, or we can use those regrets to like, all right, so I can do that differently. And I don't remember exactly how you said it, but it's like pivoting from that. All right, yeah. So if anybody says they have zero regrets, I think they're just in denial. They're just in denial. But it's one of those things of all right, what can I learn from that, and then turn it around. So we're not ruminating to some sort of negative outcome, but we're maybe ruminating on in a way that it's actually going to learn from it. And so,
well, people think, when it comes to growth, we're either linear. So we think that we're just progressing, walking down the line, trying to get somewhere ahead, right? So I'm looking behind me and I'm getting ahead. Others think it's a bit cyclical. Oh, I need to learn, and I'm going to go around in a circle and learn. And I don't think either of those work. And, I believe, and I'm not a scientist, but I believe that the universe is expanding in a spiraling fashion, right? And so can we. And if we can spiral to new levels of learning, right? So you build on something and you expand your area of influence and you expand your knowledge. And it's always, I'm trying to move my hands here. So for those who are listening, it's about, can I expand the circle of safety, the circle of knowledge? Can it grow? Can it rise? Can it continuously expand and spiral? Because if I'm not always building on the knowledge that I have and on the circle of contacts or friends that I have, but building and growing, then again, that foundation is not a very strong one, right? You talk about empowering, and that sort of growth is empowering. It's empowering to us as individuals, but you talk about it as empowering people as a result of presence, right? Can you, we're talking about being present and enjoying the present. Can you clarify, why that is so powerful?
Well, yeah, it's an interesting question because, I know emotional intelligence is a big deal to you. I've from past episodes and just following you that's a big deal. And when I think of emotional intelligence, a big part of it, at least from my viewpoint, is the self-awareness component. Like, am I aware not only of other people's emotional states and situations and my influence on that, but am I aware of myself? And I think in an unfiltered way here, Mohammed, I think I am far more blind to the impact I have on situations than what I realize. Now, maybe some of that is I have better impact than what I realize, but I think there's times where I think that I'm having this wonderfully glorious, important, wise talk with this person, and what they're really thinking is, I don't think he understands the situation, So I think the idea of the importance of presence is we often aren't aware of the impact we have. In fact, Jonathan Raymond, it was his name. He wrote a book called Good Authority, and Jonathan's got a really good phrase for it. And I won't get it exactly, but really our effectiveness can be measured by the impact we have on other people. And most of the time we don't understand the impact that we are having on other people. So I think that's part of this presence. Like when I'm there so for example, let's say someone's leading the meeting and they're a senior leader. They come in and lead the meeting because a lot of times we have the highest ranking person lead the meeting. Does the meeting just go off the rails because he or she's focusing on what they're interested in, not the other people? And so this is where it's difficult to be self-aware just because of all of our biases and things like that. But to the degree we can develop that self-awareness, we can have a better idea of what are the impacts that we're having. And how about this? Here's I think a practical way of looking at it is, I don't remember the source of the quote, but it's something along the lines of think on a team or in a department is determined by the worst behavior that you're willing to tolerate. So think about that. So our culture is defined by the worst behavior we're willing to tolerate. Okay? So if I'm willing to tolerate people, dissing each other disrespectfully in the meetings, because maybe I'm too wimpy to get, hey, wait. If I allow that sort of behavior, whether I'm doing it or not, I'm tolerating that. So I'm studying the culture. And so going back to Francis Fry, in my presence, what am I tolerating? And that can be in a good way or bad way. Like I can tolerate dissent. I can tolerate, dissenting opinions or people giving me feedback and whether I agree with it or not, but how am I doing that? Or if somebody says, hey, Andy, you made a mistake there. Whoa, and now all of a sudden I get defensive. I have just set the culture that when I'm there, it's not only setting the interactions between people, but we're setting the culture of the team too.
Right.
I don't know. Any thoughts about that?
And when you talk about presence and absence, you led me down the path that absence and presence is when I'm physically there or not. But it's also powerful to think that in the absence of the right action that I need to take. So based on this, how you define culture, if I tolerate this sort of culture that allows people to harass each other, hurt each other, the absence of making the right decision is also equally destructive. So, being present and being active, being present and being absent means that you're also role modeling that behavior even when you are there, because not speaking up, remaining silenced. And we're seeing that now. We're seeing what's happening with the Black Lives Movement. It's not enough to say I'm not racist. We have to say I'm anti-racist. I'm trying to remember the name of the gentleman. He's out of Washington, D.C. I'm not going to remember the name, but he wrote an article and said that every time a Black person dies, white people start a book club. And I wanted to unpack that and I think, what did he mean by that? I reached out to him on LinkedIn and I said, could you please go deeper? He said, what happens is with good intentions, we react to what's happening. George Floyd died, so we have all these educational sessions at work and we introduce book clubs to learn more about how you could become more informed. A person's life is more important than just starting a book club. We have to be proactive and not reactive. So it's not just about taking an educational moment now and enlightening myself. It's doing something. It's saying, okay, I've read this book, but what's my learning from it? Because in the absence of going to the next step, building that bridge to say, this is not right behavior. Right behavior means that I've learned this was wrong. We've had years, centuries of colonization and slavery. It's not enough to just read about it and say, I'm enlightened now. I actually have to say, can I role model a better behavior? Can I be an ally? Can I be someone who does things differently to help amplify those voices, right?
It's so good. We had Sylvia Ann Hewlett on the podcast. She had wrote a book came out earlier this year, Me Too in the Corporate World. And so it was before George Floyd, but it was more about the Me Too movement and how companies are waking up to the fact that behavior that was tolerated before is just not acceptable anymore. And it's not just Hollywood. It's just about any companies.
Everywhere.
Yeah, right. And so she used a term that I thought was helpful. And it was, don't be a bystander, be an upstander, which is, just a little play on the words. But I think too often in the presence, and I think actually this is a real thing in culture right now, sometimes people don't know what to say, so they don't say anything.
Right.
Because my risk is that if I say this, that it'll be coming from my perspective. And so it could easily be mistaken. So I'm just gonna be quiet. And so there's this bystander versus upstander sort of thing. And then actually our most recent episode that's published, this guy, it's a really good book. I think it's a must-read book. It's called What's Your Problem? What's Your Problem? It's a problem-solving book. Thomas Wettelsberg is the author's name. What's your problem? But he says sometimes problems are so big. Like you take racism in the US, as you and I are recording this, there's a lot of rioting in some big cities. We have issues of political polarization that is not just uniquely US, but certainly American problem. But we've got these really big problems. And sometimes it just feels like, all right, book club is all we can do. Or, at least we did the training class and people signed a form.
Yeah.
I'll be an ally or whatever, right? So it feels like there's nothing we do. And one of the things he talks about is he's got a more clever name for it, but he goes, too often what we assume is the problem is at a systems level. So what we need is a different leader in power, or what we need is a different executive. What we need is the training class. It's system. And certainly a lot of discussion on systemic, like how much of this is systemic or not. Well, the point is if we just allow it at the systems level, we can all agree, we can all point to it. I didn't meet anybody that said the whole George Floyd thing was justified. Like nobody, at least I never talked to him. I nenever heard of him. So everyone is agreeing it, but we're all agreeing at it, but not doing anything about it,
right,
really, other than maybe doing the book club so what he says is any sort of problem you're trying to solve. So it could be those sorts of things at a cultural level. It could be a systems problem or like a technology problem for within a company. It could be anytime you get a problem. If it feels like people are blaming the culture, blaming the system, their company, the executives, all that does is give us an excuse to not do anything. And so he talks about kind of bringing it more like try to reframe it as what is my contribution to this? What is my contribution? And even if I can't find any contribution, what can I do about it? So it's always bring it home to in place. So here's an example after the whole George Floyd thing. I've spent a lot of time trying to reflect. And here's a couple things I've come down to. One is I don't think it's a question of whether or not any of us are racist. I think it's more along the lines of when we are racist. And what I mean by that is that racist seems to imply you either are or aren't. And no one goes around saying, I am. Everyone goes around saying, he is, right? But we don't do that. So the question isn't, am I or not? It's when am I? And so that's why labels really get in trouble. So here's something I noticed. I noticed that a lot of my clip art, like images on some of my slides, tended to be a lot more Caucasian than not. Now, I started changing that a long time ago when I started doing more work in Africa and in other countries. But the fact is, even in LinkedIn, when I'd use an emoji of like a finger pointing, it was almost always a white finger. So now I just use the darkest tone finger I can find. It's just a little thing, but sometimes little things. So Thomas Wettelsberg would say, there's problems at the culture level. Vote, advocate, march, protest, whatever, do what you can. Don't just sit back and do the book club, if that's the terminology that you mentioned.
Yeah.
What is it that I can do? And you can take that far beyond social causes. We can do that at the, hey, listen, our company culture kind of sucks. All right. Now we can all blame the company culture. We can blame the executives, but what am I doing?
Right.
Team. And Marcus Buckingham's his most recent book, 9 Lies About Work. Culture is one of the lies. He goes, culture is not a thing, because a company could have a great culture down here, and if it's toxic at the team level, people still leave. The only thing that matters is local. Now, it's probably a bit provocative, but I think that there's a fair amount of truth to that. It's all local. Right? What can you and I do? What, at the local level? And there's maybe only a little bit we can do. But if we can keep our focus on that, to me, that's empowering, because then it's not just finger pointing, it's not just excuse, it's not just whining or complaining. It's empowering, right? Now, what can we do? Yeah.
And I'll take it back to what you said about presence and absence. So being present means what can I do, and being absent is also what am I not doing. So the absence of our action, the absence of us standing up and being an upstander as opposed to a bystander, becoming an ally and recognizing that it's not just that I'm inherently racist. Most of us are not. We're not walking around joining the Ku Klux Klan, right? But we can behave in ways that are toxic, ways that are not speaking out, and therefore we're aiding and abetting these wrong systemic practices that have allowed us to build our nations on wrong ethics and wrong values, because it's become the status quo. And that's why we say it's really difficult to do anything about it. But change starts with us. So what can I do to behave differently? Whether it's a workplace, if there's a woman being harassed or a man being harassed, do I turn the other way? If there's a car accident, my daughter was involved in, is she around? She's going to see I'm using her as an example. But she said to me that the other day, somebody was hit behind us, and it was so powerful. I thought they hit us. I said, what did you do? She goes, well, I stopped for 10 minutes, make sure everybody was okay. That's what I want her to do, because that's being present. Being absent means I didn't get hit, I keep driving. So I think there's a fine line between when something is happening in our communities and all I do is read a book. Mm-hmm. Did I speed away or did I drive away a little slower? That's what reading a book feels like to me. Is I look and I said, oh, there was a horrible car accident. Everybody's okay. I think, yep, I keep driving. But I think, I have to step out and get out of the car and make sure everybody's all right. I have to be part of the solution. And I think, what can I do? And so that, I think, is presence. And as leaders, people say to me, what the hell is this unfiltered leadership? Is it about leaders and becoming good corporate leaders? Well, you can be a good corporate leader. You can be a good manager or a good people leader at work, or somebody who is going to role model good behavior. If you're not a good human being, if you're not at peace with yourself and you're unfiltered in the sense that it's no BS, it's no hidden agenda, you're transparent, you're aiming to be honest as you can be, then, you start with role modeling that behavior at home with Sarah and your 5 kids, and, with my 3 kids and with my wife. And then I take that to the community. I take that whether to the church, the mosque, or the synagogue, or the park. I take it to work. And I don't divide that persona of who I am at home and who I am at work. And I say, you know what? I have a responsibility to be a better person. I have a responsibility to be a better leader. And I think, when you talk about when you look in your wake, what you leave behind are the actions, and they speak far greater than the words that you and I are, right? It's those actions will say to people, this is what Andy did. This is what Andy does. And I think that's powerful, right? That to me is leadership.
Yeah. Well said.
Well said. Yeah. You talk about a lot of books, Andy, and I'm just in awe of the power of what you brought to this podcast in terms of who you know and who you quoted and how they've impacted your life. Is there one book that you would recommend to us to read because it'll impact and maybe allow us to be a little more aware?
It's so interesting because every once in a while I get that question like, oh man, what's your favorite book? And it's a little bit like asking which is my favorite child because it's one of those things where at some level, each book brings something to the table. So one way to answer the question is, which book do I read most often? And for many years, I've read the Bible cover to cover. It's just something, a morning routine, and so it's just kind of like a centering thing. And so certainly that's something that I would say, well, by far, I've read that far more than any book. Early in my career, the Covey's book, The 7 Habits, massively influential to that generation. And they just had a updated version of it come out, but it's one of those things where just so many powerful ideas there that, being proactive, and seek to understand before you try to be understood. I mean, so many powerful things in that book. So usually when someone asks me like, what's your favorite book? I might say, what's the presenting issue? So if you're looking for insight on how to influence, then I'd probably say Dr. Robert Cialdini's book on influence. If you're looking for time management, well, do you find yourself a really structured person? Then David Allen's book on that might be good. If you feel like you're not like that, or so it really kind of depends on the issue. But this is something that I guess I think at least part of your audience is newer leaders, people that want to grow. And there's a book by a guy named David Epstein that came out. I'm pretty sure it was last year, and it's called Range. And The book, if I had to summarize kind of a key idea to see if somebody would want to read it, is should you specialize or be a generalist? And he puts a lot of focus on being a generalist. One of the terms he uses is sample. We need to sample. We need to sample like crazy, which is to say, try lots of different things. Because to your point earlier, that about potential, we may not, like I make a living speaking now. 30 years ago, if I had to speak in front of even a group of 10 people, I would have been freaked out and not been able to sleep. And so I didn't even have any vision for that being potential, except for sampling, speaking at conferences, trying new things. And so David Epstein puts together I think a very compelling argument for don't surround yourself with just people like you. So that touches on some of the diversity things that we just talked about. Don't just focus on being the expert at what you're doing currently. Sample other things, interact with other people, explore other opportunities. And this sampling can help set you up for things in the future. And so I don't know, I think it's a powerful idea. He's a wonderful writer beyond that, but David Epstein, the book is Range, and it's something about why generalists triumph in a world of specialization or something like that. It's
especially when we're telling people, as a speaker, you have to find your lane, right? You find your niche. And it's interesting to look at the other side, which is I think it's talking about being more wholesome and yes, you want to be an expert in something, but don't be ignorant in other things or in many things, right? And I think, what I just kind of learned from what you shared is aim to be an expert, sure, but make sure that you're well-rounded. Make sure that you've got knowledge, because otherwise you're going to be ignorant in a situation or in a conversation, and that's going to do you a disservice. It's also going to do a disservice to the other person. So
you just really beautifully said his premise. He's like, the more you do that, you have more data points to draw on. You can start seeing patterns differently, but it's actually easier to not do that. It's easier to only get your news from one source. It's easy to only hang out with people who worship like you or think like you or vote like you or do the same sorts of things. And so
what you said too.
Just look at your guest list. Your guest list is so diverse. I mean, it's beautifully living up to your aspiration here of how do we get unfiltered perspectives from all you're sampling, right? Here are samples of people. You live that out.
And you know what you're saying about that good book and reading, it's very situational. So you'll read the Bible this morning and tomorrow you'll read it and you'll have a different answer. And I think that's the epitome of a good book, is to be able to take something about it. But that's also because of the way that you're engaging with that book or that person or that situation. So I think, bring yourself wholly to an interaction, whether you're interacting with a human, whether you're interacting with a book, bring yourself wholly and completely, be present. Because when you do that, when you're not present, when you're absent, your actions are going to speak for you. So this is where I always say this, and I'll say it again. I could talk for another hour, and I'd love to, and I'd love to catch up with you in the future. But this is where I ask you, as the guest today, I have something called the Unfiltered Thought of the Week. So I ask Andy Kaufman, could you please give one piece of advice to our listeners today? What is something that they can do to become better individuals, better leaders, better versions of themselves, a better human being? Over to you.
Yeah, I'll reinforce something that we talked about before, and just to reemphasize it, is just fill in the blank. It's not whether or not you are fill in the blank. It's when you are fill in the blank. So I think a lot of people are self-limiting in that, well, I'm just introverted or I'm just extrovert. No, the question is not whether you're introverted or not. It's when you are introverted, because you take two strong introverts who are best friends doing something they both love, they have extroverted tendencies. And so I think we're too apt to put ourselves in these boxes. It's not a whether we are ever in the box, it's when are we in that box. And if we can kind of get our arms wrapped around that, it's not when I'm a bystander, it's when I'm a bystander. It's not like we talked about races. I think if we can, it's not get rid of all the labels, because that's really difficult to do, because we're just wired to to put people in boxes and stuff like that. But we can just be like, wait. When am I like that? Because there are times that I don't act like a good human. You get me in the right set of circumstances, and I am not proud of how I'm going to act in that circumstance. And so it's if we can identify those whens, I think it's a powerful idea and can help us with some of the self-limiting problems we have.
Well, it can help us with unleashing and maximizing our potential, because now, whether we're doing that to ourselves or our interaction with others, so if I'm sitting down with you and giving you feedback, and at work or at home, and I don't focus on you as being inherently a good or a bad person, but I look at the action that you are involved in, and I give you feedback on that action. Now I've allowed you to grow. If I say to you, you're stupid, or you're smart. And how many times do we do that as parents or in the workplace, right? We give feedback to the individual and their attributes as opposed to the activity and the action, because I maybe can't grow in my attributes, but in how I behave, I can stretch, I can push out, I can expand, I can spiral, and I can unleash that potential, right? So completely on board with you. It's not, it is about when I'm being either positive or negative, weakness, strength. Look at it, because that's where you can flex it and you can rein it in or push it out. So thank you today for an enlightening, and a fun opportunity to chat and learn about you and what you do so well. Thank you for being unfiltered, and thank you for being my guest today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
God bless. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Unfiltered, the show about authentic leadership and personal growth. Like what you heard? Click subscribe, share it, and tell a friend about it. And don't forget to leave a rating.